Hello, I'm Nirav Patel. I'm the founder and CEO of Framework. We are doing a live stream today, and we're doing a live stream because we've got a really big year ahead of us. We're going to actually be doing probably a lot of live here. We are big believers in iteration. We like to try stuff over and over again and get better every time. And so we are going to try it right now. And so if folks have questions that are answerable, definitely feel free to ask those questions and we will answer them, or I will answer them to the extent that I can answer them. Okay, I guess ground rules for questions. Questions that are not about future product plans. So for example, asking if we're going to add a certain feature to a Framework laptop or release a certain type of product in the future. Those are very likely to be questions that I'm probably not going to answer right now. In general, we like to make announcements right as we're about to be able to ship something. And a big part of that is that we don't like to pre-promise or like pre-commit to things until we've actually like prototyped it and developed it and designed it out and developed it to the extent that we're confident that one, we can actually like make it work and ship it and that it'll be a great product, but two, that it's actually something that will have longevity behind it. Longevity obviously is like a really key critical part of our overall mission. So I'm not going to answer future product questions. Let's see what other kinds of questions people have today. Okay, there's a question. What do you think about LPCAM2? Oh, so this is actually super interesting. There is a member of the community, actually a hardware developer out there in the world named Lucas, out in, I believe he's based in Germany, and he actually just posted, I think earlier this week or late last week on what is now called X, Twitter, a rendering of a Framework Laptop 13 mainboard that he's in early progress on developing. So another third-party mainboard developer that actually has LPCAM too. So it was super interesting. And he's posted like some slight hints about what he's developing. So I'm not going to ruin. I know like maybe a little bit more than what he's publicly posted about this mainboard that he's developing. But it is super cool to see that there are now two active third-party mainboard projects ongoing for Firmware Laptop 13. There's the Deep Computing RISC-V project, and then there's Lucas with his mainboard that he's also in progress on. So super cool to see. Also cool to see that he was able to kind of lay out and place LPCAM2 in a way that it seems like it does actually fit fairly well, which would make sense. Okay, let's see. What other? Okay, so there's a question here. Exciting developments in the 3D printing scene for Framework devices. Yes, we actually do have contests with printables, which is part of Prusa 3D. So Prusa is like one of the biggest 3D printer manufacturers based in the Czech Republic, and they make really great printers. We have a few of them here in the US and in our Taiwan office. And they have printables, which is like their 3D model repository, and they run design contests every now and then. And so actually right now running a Framework mainboard reuse design contest for people to come up with projects to reuse Framework laptop mainboards that are 3D printed projects. And we've seen some completely insane ones. Like there's one called the Best Deck, which is a gaming handheld. We've seen actually quite a few gaming handhelds that reuse Framework laptop 13 mainboards. This one's actually probably the most polished of the, I don't know, like 6 or 7 different gaming handhelds we've seen. It's also open source, which is awesome. There are actually a bunch of other cool projects that folks are posting as well. So definitely go take a look at that contest. And there's a question of whether I'm streaming from the Framework front camera. I am streaming from the Framework front camera. This is a Framework Laptop 13 I'm streaming from. It is a unit from someone in the marketing team, I think. So I'm actually not sure which version of Framework Laptop 13 it is, but it is the current second gen camera that we launched last year. So better image sensor, higher sensitivity. Obviously, like there's a ton of light coming in this room, so we're not actually really getting a benefit from the light sensitivity, But if this room was very dark, then it would be better than our first gen LP. Okay, so there's a question from Joe, who is actually also a developer in the community, as asking a question about whether plans to add more detail to the website for expansion cards, for example, listing the audio codec back on the website, HDMI card, max resolution, and frame rate. That was a great question. Actually, this is something that we've thought a lot about just throughout the entire life of Framework, thinking about how much detail we put on the site itself versus in other types of documentation, like out on GitHub, or even just like answering questions directly in the community or putting knowledge base articles up. And in the past, actually, we've been a little bit deliberate about not making our product pages on our site be like overwhelming for people who are maybe not like deeply intimately familiar with like every aspect of the underlying technology, but making it like a bit more approachable and accessible. We have also like really consistently seen that everyone wants specs. People want deeper, more detailed specs. And so we probably will start to get a bit more detailed in things like our spec tables on our website. That's something that obviously will continue to improve as we go. But then, like for the deepest detail, more than likely that is still what we'll use GitHub for. GitHub and also our community forum. So, like if you go on our GitHub repositories right now, you can get schematics and CAD and reference designs, like full on detail. And then oftentimes people will write GitHub issues asking for like specific on like even further detail on an aspect of a project. When we get a chance, do we go in there and try to add more detail as well? Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, stats for nerds, but framework. I don't know what that means, but that sounds accurate to what we're trying to do here. Let's see. Cleanup of so there's a question around cleaning up the GitHub repository. We actually did a few months ago, like kind of an overall index page. So if you go like directly to our organization account in GitHub, now it is like kind of a high level table of contents for the different repositories that we have. As you go like into each repository, though, we can definitely do a bit more cleanup. That is also something we need to invest in among the many things that we need to invest in as a small team. So we are just like balancing the various things and trying to improve every part of it as we go. And there was a question about whether it's possible to create an Opulent expansion card. We would love to see a community member try to make an Opulent expansion card. It would be very difficult to make an Opulent expansion card. It is theoretically not impossible. So you could actually do a USB or you could do a Thunderbolt controller in a very large expansion card and stick Oculink port off of the Thunderbolt card and pump PCIe over that. I don't know if that would be a good idea. It's possible. There is actually Josh Cook in the community is actually developing a Framework Laptop 16 expansion bay module with an Oculink connector on it, which actually is a really great idea because that doesn't need an additional bridge. That is just straight up PCIe from the Framework Laptop 16 APU over expansion bay connector that would normally have like a DGPU attached to screen graphics attached for the graphics module, and instead just takes those PCIe lanes and throws them out over a Oculink connector. I think he's also looking at whether like a retimer or redriver is needed for signal integrity. That is very much achievable to stick an Oculink connector on the back of the laptop 16. Okay, so there's a question about does any Framework laptop have N-key rollover? Actually, yes. So the Framework Laptop 16 keyboards do have N-key rollover, and it is intended to be a higher performance machine for people gaming, and so we felt that makes sense. That's important to people who go into specific types of games where like you can actually run into key rollover issues. And so we did make sure to enable N-key rollover. Okay, and then there's some questions on can we get a Cooler Master case or STL files for the Framework Laptop 16 mainboard? Actually, that is something that we would like to do. It is obviously quite a bit larger, physically larger than than the Firmware Laptop 13 is, which makes it harder to make a 3D printable design. One other part of it that is also a bit more complex is that for Framework Laptop 13, the thermal solution is basically entirely integrated on the mainboard itself. It's just straight up mounted to the mainboard. For Framework Laptop 16, it is the heatsink that's on the mainboard itself, and then the airflow for it, the fans, are part of the expansion bay modules. And so it does mean that like the tolerances and the fit and just the overall complexity of being able to slide that expansion bay module onto a 3D printed design is a bit harder. Obviously, it is still really important to be able to reuse the main boards outside of the laptop, main boards being among the most expensive parts, or I guess the most expensive part of the system. We want to make sure it doesn't go to waste if you ever upgrade that main board in the future. And so that is something that we will try to power on in some form. Obviously, we did publish the documentation, like CAD drawings for the Framework Laptop 16 mainboard on GitHub. And so like it is actually open today for someone to be able to make their own 3D printable design. So if you're out there and you are a CAD expert, you're a CAD junkie somewhere in the world, and you're itching for a CAD project to take on, definitely make an attempt. And if you successfully design a 3D printable case for a Framework Laptop 16 mainboard, we will send you a thing. Given that we didn't think of this beforehand, we're going to come up with what that thing is, but definitely post that online and we'll send you a thing. Okay, someone's telling me stop moving away from the mic, so I'm going to move physically closer to the mic. Okay, let's see. What other questions are there that are not about future products that we're not going to talk about because we're not going to talk about future product plans? There's a question around a Noctua framework collab, which also goes to future stuff. We like Noctua as a company. They don't make notebook fans. This is something that actually they get asked a lot based on our understanding of chatting with a couple of people there. They're totally focused on let's see, axial or radial, whichever one is the one that's in desktop fans, and not the ones that are in notebooks. And so if Noctua makes a notebook fan in the future, definitely we'll be the first to try to get it in there, hopefully. And then there's a question. Okay, we got a question about power bank for Framework Laptop 13 batteries. I love that. So this is actually something we showed a proof of concept of 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, when we did our Framework Next Level event in the beginning of 2023, with where we announced the Framework Laptop 13 with the AMD processor and also Framework Laptop 16. We showed off some additional reuse prototypes and proof of concepts, and one of them that we showed off was being able to take a battery out of a Framework Laptop 13, stick it in this enclosure, and use it as a power bank. And we showed that basically to prove that it was possible, and hopes also that someone out there in the world, and also a third party, as we're starting to see these third parties come in, would look at that and decide like, oh, what an awesome product. Let's make that so Framework doesn't have to. No one's done that yet. So in the end, eventually, someday, we may have to be the ones to make that power bank reuse module. But it is something that we think is useful. Obviously, like a battery that maybe is cycled out of being useful for a laptop, it could still be totally useful for a power bank. And so that's something that would be really great to see in the world if there is someone out there who's interested in building it. Okay, let's see. We've got some questions around making the chassis upgradable and modular. Well, I guess in some ways it is modular. So if we look at both the Framework Laptop 13 and the Framework Laptop 16, it's Framework Laptop 16 especially, or just looking at any laptop generally. So it breaks down into what in the industry are called the A cover, the B cover, the C cover, and the D cover. And that's like kind of going down the stack of a closed laptop. So the A cover is like the lid, the D cover is the bottom cover. And for both of our products, those items are all separable. So in our case, like the B cover is just that magnetic attached bezel for the Framework Laptop 13 and for the 16, color customizable. The A cover obviously is a single panel. But then if we think about the C cover, that input cover For Framework Laptop 13, it is like a monolithic block, but for 16, it is modular. So you can slide out the touchpad, you can slide out the spacers, you can move the keyboard and the numpad around, you can move the spacers, you can get an LED matrix in there. People started building their own. Actually, there are third-party input modules already for Framework Laptop 16, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, modularity is there for the chassis at a level that makes sense. Going beyond that would probably start to really hurt structural integrity. So it's probably not the case that we go more modular than on the chassis than like how far we've gone on Framework Laptop 16. And there is a question on, are we always going to be direct to consumer? We actually did deliberately pick a strategy of being direct from the beginning. And part of this is that we want to have a direct relationship with everyone who buys one of our products. That's like a core part of the philosophy, that if you buy a Framework product, we want you to know where you can come back to pick up any part in the future, and to not have that be kind of like fragmented across different retailers and e-commerce sites, or maybe like a retailer decides they don't want to carry a certain module for a certain period of time, even though they're selling the product itself. In general, especially as a startup, you don't have a lot of power over those retail relationships. You don't have a lot of leverage over retail relationships. And so for us, right from the beginning, we deliberately decided as a strategy, we're going to focus on making our direct-to-consumer e-commerce experience as good as we can, and make sure that it's better than what we could offer going through a retailer. And then that's one part of it. And then another part of it, similarly, being a startup, we have to be really, really careful on the overall economics of our company. And so we don't want to put ourselves in a position where maybe we could drive some additional volume going through retailers or going through distributors, but we're doing so in a way that it really detracts from our ability to fund our own product roadmap. And so obviously when you go through retailers and you go through distributors, you give up a big chunk of product margin. Notebooks as an industry traditionally are a pretty low margin industry. It's not something like, let's say, apparel, where the margins typically would allow for retail more readily. For electronics, especially for things like notebooks and many other categories as well, the margins are pretty narrow. And so for us to be able to be self-sufficient and to be able to drive our own expansion into additional categories, we want to be really deliberate on making the economics work. And so that's another part of making sure that we're not having to give up a large chunk of the total margin of any product sale to a retailer. There's a lot of questions around battery technology and cooling technology. I will say I'm not a battery chemistry expert or a solid state cooling expert, so I can form and offer opinions about pretty much anything. But I'm sure that any other YouTube channel talking about either of those topics is going to be more credible than my answer on solid state cooling or battery chemistry, new novel battery chemistries, not current mature battery chemistries. Let's see. The biggest thing learned developing Framework Laptop 13 and 16. That is a great question. Actually, there's quite a lot that we've learned from Framework Laptop 13 that we then applied to Framework Laptop 16. So just to pick an example, connectors are a big part of getting modularity and durability right for an upgradable product. So throughout the inside of this machine, there are many different connectors. So ZIF connectors for like FFCs or FPCs. There's board-to-board connectors. There's like cable-to-board connectors. There's all sorts of different connectors. And the key thing about connectors is that typically for applications like notebooks, really consumer electronics generally, these connectors are designed to be handled maybe twice, like once when first being assembled, and then maybe like once or twice again in the event that that system is sent back to like a service center or repair center to be repaired. So these are often like fragile connectors. They're very tiny connectors. They're not designed for like robust cycle life to be cycled over and over again. And so for Framework Laptop 13, a lot of what we did was just making sure we could pick connectors that could be cycled enough times that you can swap modules repeatedly without running into being cycled out of connector life and having something like a main board fail just because a connector on it has failed. And so we focused on that. But then basically taking all the learnings from Framework Laptop 13 into Framework Laptop 16, we're able to go a lot further on improving the user experience behind the connectors. And so just to pick two examples, one for Framework Laptop 13, we have the battery attached on a cable with a cable to board connector. And it's a robust connector. It can survive a lot of cycling, but it is difficult to like carefully align and insert. And so when we were starting Framework Laptop 16 development, that was like a really clear area where we decided, let's just foolproof that. Let's do a blade connector instead. It's a little bit more mechanically complex in like some ways, but we can make it like super robust. We can make it super easy to slot in and not have to worry about that cable. So that was one learning from Framework Laptop 13. And then another one was the input cover cable. So there's a long FPC that we put a lot of stiffeners on, basically to make it so that if you're like blindly pulling it, that when you're putting stress on it, you don't risk tearing that cable. And so we actually haven't seen failures around the cable tearing, but it is still a little bit difficult, maybe a bit nerve-wracking if it's your first time opening it and there's like a cable and you pull it and the cable disconnects. It's like, oh, did I break it? You probably did not break it. It's pretty robust, but it's still an uncomfortable feeling. And so a big part of Framework Laptop 16 was, one, let's make sure that the common scenarios, like for example, moving that keyboard to slot in a numpad, that's all connected with pogo connectors rather than cables. So those can be cycled repeatedly. They're magnetic aligned. There's pins for like final alignment, and it's like ultra robust for a very, very large number of cycles. But then there are still FPCs. So like that input deck, that mid plate that the input modules for Framework Laptop 16 sit on, connecting that to the main board is still a little FPC. But one thing that we did differently is not make it blind mated. So blind mating is this idea, or is this term in electronics, or probably just other places too, but electronics, where you have a connection that you need to make or a cable that you need to attach where you can't actually see it, where you're connecting or disconnecting it in a way that like the actual end user operator is like not like visibly seeing it. And so one thing we did instead for Framework Laptop 16 is that it's not blind mate. There's a cutout in the mid plate where you see the cable, you see the connector, you see where it goes on the main board, and you can like visually confirm, oh yes, it's been plugged in, or oh, I better unplug this before I take this plate off. So I think that was a long answer. That only covers two of the very many things that we've learned, but hopefully that was helpful. Okay, let's see what other questions I had here since that very long question that I just answered. We got questions around, what do you think about third-party mainboards that don't allow company vision? Like for example, an SoC from Qualcomm or Apple, not that we get Apple, with only upgradable storage. So this is actually interesting and timely because that deep computing mainboard, the first third-party mainboard that's available, that will become available, that deep computing is making for Framework Laptop 13, that actually does have soldered memory. It does not have socketed memory, and that is actually a limitation of the RISC-V SoC that they used. That SoC was really only originally intended for embedded applications. Like that was not designed to be a laptop processor. It is just that deep computing identified that like, hey, we can actually turn this into a functioning laptop mainboard and start to enable developers on RISC-V way ahead of their being like designed for laptop RISC-V processors. And so the trade-off was that, well, one, it's relatively low end from performance standpoint. So it's like not like an end user ready performance mainboard. It really is a developer facing mainboard. But the other trade-off is because it's an embedded SoC or intended as embedded SoC, the peripheral set is an embedded peripheral set. So there's no socketed memory. There's only one display output interface. The storage interfaces are like eMMC and like so there's like two eMMCs. So there's like a onboard eMMC that you can socket in, and then there's also like an SD card, so micro SD card slot. But still, it's cool that we can enable that kind of stuff, or that really that third parties can enable that kind of stuff and take those trade-offs to enable developers rather than waiting potentially years or maybe even forever for there to be like a pure framework philosophy aligned, everything is socketed in module or version of a RISC-V SoC. Let's see, there's a question. Oh yeah, there's a question. Anyone running Delta 240 watt charger for the Framework Laptop 16 yet? We actually have tested out a few different 240 watt chargers that are out there. I don't know if specifically tested that Delta One. We have seen effectively every power supply manufacturer. It's like ODM style original manufacturer, not like end user facing brands. They all are developing their own 240-watt chargers because they want to be able to offer those technologies to their customers, would be brands like us, for example. And so when they pitch us on like, hey, we want a power adapter or your future power adapters, they send us samples of all the cool things that stuff like 240-watt power adapters. So it's taken a lot longer than expected for the industry broadly to start adopting USB PD1. We were accidentally the first ones to ship a 180-watt adapter, and we expected there to be 240-watt much earlier than there has been. But it does seem like the industry is starting to move, and we've seen folks in the community also picking up that Delta 240-watt power adapter that's available, I think, on DigiKey, and using it with their Firmware Laptop 16s. So it is super cool that that movement is finally happening. Okay, we've got a question on Honeywell PTM 7950, everyone's favorite thermal interface compound. So for folks who are not familiar with this, Honeywell, the company that makes nuclear reactors, among many other things, also makes phase change thermal paste. That's called PTM 7950. Member of the framework community, literally like 3 years ago, I wish I remembered the person's name, started experimenting with this stuff in a framework laptop, just repasted the framework laptop 13, got actually really great results. And people in the community since then have been like consistently trying it out in different systems. Linus Tech Tips actually also saw that framework community forum thread and decided themselves to also test this. And actually just recently shared this in, I think we updated a blog post. We'll share more about this soon as well, but we actually did move Framework Laptop 16 from using liquid metal to using actually Honeywell's phase change thermal material as a slight variant called the 7958. I think it's a 7950. And the 58 variant is basically just like machine applicable rather than coming in pad form. And so we actually switched from liquid metal to phase change. Liquid metal performance is pretty excellent. Like theoretical performance is about as good as you can reasonably get. The challenge with liquid metal that we found is that for some systems, over a large number of thermal cycles, so basically like getting it up to heated and then cooled, over and over again, there can be scenarios where the liquid metal will slowly pump out of the space between the CPU and the heatsink in a way that leaves like little dry spots that reduce performance. So it's something that we saw reported in the field. It's something that we actually ran some ongoing long-term reliability tests on. We're able to reproduce some root cause. And so once we root caused it, figured out what was happening, we tested out different ways of basically trying to just reduce pump out with liquid metal, but then ultimately also just started looking at, okay, what other thermal interface materials are there? Is there something that can give us both the performance of liquid metal and the longevity that we really want from a thermal cycling perspective? And we found that Honeywell PTM material actually does achieve both of those. And so we just a few weeks ago moved Framework Laptop 16 ongoing production from liquid metal over to the Honeywell phase change material. And that is also something, so that phase change kit basically will also be making it available to existing Framework Laptop 16 customers who would like to switch over if they are seeing long-term performance like start to degrade on the Framework Laptop 16. If you're not, there isn't really a strong reason to switch. And then also we'll be listing it in the framework marketplace just for anyone who wants to pick it up to be able to put on really any of their Framework Laptop 13 or Framework Laptop 16. And there's for folks who have Framework Laptop 16s, there is a knowledge base article that you can reference to check out more information on this. Okay, let's see. What other questions are there here? We've got a lot of country questions, so this kind of also goes into the bucket of long-term or let's say like future plans that I can't provide any context or guidance on now. And this still goes back to this challenge where like basically anything, let's say hardware development, expanding to a new country, enabling some entirely new set of software. These are all things that oftentimes have like 1 to 2 year or even longer lead times from like the beginning of, hey, let's start researching this thing to let's announce it and turn it on. And so when we're like in the middle of that, we don't want to like make a very bold guess on like, yes, we're going to be able to do this in this way at this time and start to make those claims. Part of our philosophy generally in Framework, but also really any startup, is that you should be really, really deliberate to like under promise, over deliver, and really especially not promise things that are far enough in the future that you can't guarantee their existence, or even just their existence in the way that you would like to announce ahead of time. And so that's why like when we announce a new product, it's typically a few months away from some actionable step that a person can take with it, whether that's like receiving that item or getting that software or pre-ordering a thing. And so we make that announcement when we have high confidence in the thing and what it is, what it does, and when we can deliver it. We've got a question around Framework for Business. So Framework for Business is growing actually really consistently. So the Framework for Business, for context, is our program to enable small and medium businesses, also to enable enterprises. We're getting some like EDU customers, we're getting some like government customers, basically all sorts of people around various companies are looking at our products and seeing like, hey, this is not just a consumer thing. Actually, we want products that last longer. We want products we can own more deeply. And they're reaching out. And we actually didn't expect them to reach out so early, but they started reaching out even all the way back in 2021 when we first started. And so we've started building a Framework for Business team, and we actually have just seen continued growth, actually faster than our consumer sales have been growing, which has been cool to see. And that is something that we're going to continue to put energy behind, because we want to fix it. Obviously, businesses are a massive source of e-waste and would benefit from a longer lasting repairable laptop just as much as consumers do. Okay, let's see. Let's take like 2 or 3 more questions and call this first iteration of live stream a day after that. Okay, what do we have? Can you make an article explaining challenges of releasing a new country? We actually did. Like, let's see. I think it was probably 2 years ago at this point, or maybe a little bit longer than that. We made an article when we first launched in Germany. We wrote up a blog post, like pretty extensive blog post, detailing out the various steps that go into being able to launch in a country. So that, like, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just like as a subset, there's like stuff like getting a path through customs, having an entity to be able to file taxes once you're above a certain revenue threshold. Those countries want your money as a company. You cannot just ship stuff into a country and hope for the best. No, they want their tax money, as they should. And so like being able to do VAT filings, being able to offer support, being able to have a service center locally in the event that returns are coming back, basically having the customs path or service path for items to be able to exit that country as well as enter that country. Obviously for us as a company making laptops, we also have keyboard languages and power adapters to consider. And for any electronics maker, of course, there's also generally certifications, so things like safety certs, EMI and ESD certs. They're both quite expensive and also extensive in terms of the complexity of running those things. And then there are actually also a number of countries, including some that folks have flagged here, that have some pretty onerous additional regulations required to enter, especially for electronics, and in some cases even specifically for notebooks, about things like percent composition of product that have to be sourced from within that country, where as a startup, we probably can't achieve that just yet. But obviously, we know that there's demand. We see that there's demand from really all over the world. And so we are continuing to expand as far as we can, as fast as we can. And just this year, we have expanded to, I think, probably something like 15 additional countries, all in the EU. So basically, we're now at a point where we're in almost all of the EU, and we are on a path to being in all of the EU pretty quickly. But we're not going to stop there. We are going to continue to build out infrastructure to be able to continue to grow. Okay, let's take let's do 2 more. Okay, let's see which ones are answerable. I see a lot of future product questions. Let's see. Anyone have any current product questions or non-product questions? Oh, I've got an easy question. Oh wait, no, never mind. That person was joking about that, so I'll skip that one. Okay, so public documentation and full capacity on what we can do with the framework BIOS. So this is a tricky one. So when we think about the firmware of a framework laptop, it breaks down into BIOS, so really UFI now, rather than like old school BIOS, and then the embedded controller. And so the embedded controller firmware actually runs on a chip called the embedded controller. It's a separate microcontroller that does a bunch of interfacing and housekeeping stuff. And the cool thing about the embedded controller firmware in framework laptops is that it is open source. It's entirely open source. We actually took Google's Chromium EC firmware that they developed for Chromebooks, which is also open source, their Chromium EC firmware, and then brought it into framework laptops, including our non-Chromebook framework laptops, all of our framework laptops. So our firmware team, Kieran and Daniel and Alex, have been continuing to develop that embedded controller firmware, and it is up on GitHub, so you can actually literally just jump in, grab that firmware, start playing around with it. And we have seen community members start to make their own modifications, also submit patches, which has been really, really cool to see. So that is all there. I mean, the documentation is in the repository. Some of it may be documentation through code, so you might have to read some code for some aspects of it, but there is also a lot of really great documentation. And then the BIOS. So the BIOS is a tricky one. The BIOS today, we actually do license a closed BIOS. We have explored every option out there for an open source BIOS, and it is one of the many, many things that as a company we have to take trade-offs around, where if we prioritize going full open on BIOS, we would actually need to execute much, much more slowly on being able to develop and release new hardware. Today, the ecosystem is maturing. We see AMD and Intel both making various announcements around more open BIOS initiatives, which is awesome over the long term. In the near term today, we decided actually our priority is we want to build really competitive products that are high performance, that launch early enough that they can be competitive in market. And so we had to enable that, just leverage these off-the-shelf BIOS packages that are available from BIOS integrators or UFI integrators now, I guess. And so the one that we picked is called Inside. It's a pretty popular developer package of UFI firmware for Intel and AMD. A lot of other laptop makers use it, like Dell and HP, I think, are both pretty heavy users of Inside. And so that's one place as a company we decided today we're going to differentiate on embedded controller. We're going to be open on embedded controller. Today we're not going to be differentiated on the BIOS end of things. We're going to make sure we can ship competitive hardware faster and obviously continue to monitor that space and invest where we can so that in the future we can get to a more open world. Okay, we'll do one more and then call it. How difficult is it to create a startup in a world of giants? That is a great question, and I really like that question a lot. This is a tricky one. So my background is before Framework, I was part of the early team in Oculus. I was the person who started the hardware organization in Oculus, building these VR headsets. And so the cool thing about Oculus was that VR was dead. There was no VR industry at that time, really, aside from very niche, like industrial VR stuff. And so as a startup, we got to focus on this entirely blank space around us and had to invent a market essentially for consumer VR. We had to prove that there was actually demand for this supposedly totally dead category, which is hard. It's hard because you have to convince people of a thing that is totally unproven in the world. But in some ways it's easier in that there is no competition. You can get it running head start, which we actually did, and be able to make super fast progress. So by the time people realize like, whoa, there is something here. It turns out it is possible to consumer VR headset. You're already far enough ahead that as a startup, you can actually make like a real dent and drive an industry and drive change. Framework is like almost exactly the opposite. For us, it was very deliberately, we're going to pick the most mature categories we can possibly imagine. Categories that have been forgotten, so not dead categories like VR, but rather categories that are so mature and stale and stagnant that people more or less stop caring about them. both the companies in the space and the consumers buying the product have like sort of relegated them to like, okay, there's no more innovation left in notebooks. We're done with notebooks. Notebooks are done. They're just mature. And decided, no, actually, they're not done. We look at notebooks today, we look at other categories today, and we see we can do better. We know how to do better. And the fundamental operating mode of this category is just totally broken. And so there's a nice thing about that, which is that the market is known, the market is mature. We're not going into a category that we have to invent and trying to guess what the addressable market is for us as a company. Instead, we know exactly what the size of the market is. We know exactly who's buying notebooks. We know why they're buying them. We know who they're buying them from. We know like the entire competitive dynamics of the space that we're in. It's like really powerful being able to enter space with that kind of information. And obviously, that's great in a number of ways because we don't have to prove whether a market exists. But it is also challenging a lot of ways because we have to prove that as this scrappy little startup fighting against all of our competitors, which are giant multi-billion-dollar companies, that we can actually compete and not just survive, but actually beat them in the categories that they've been operating in for decades. And from what we've done in the last 4 years, I have extreme confidence that we both have done that and are going to continue to be able to do that, and we're going to be able to win. And all of you obviously understand this. Like you're in this world of like, yeah, it feels so obvious. Obviously, we should build computers this way. It's crazy not to build computers this way. And you're all on like the leading edge of this with us, and we have like just the utmost confidence that this is going to become more and more obvious to more and more people as we continue to prove it by making products that work and making products that work well. Okay, so that was it for this live stream. We're gonna probably do more of these. We're gonna fix the audio next time. We're gonna fix the lighting because like the sun moved and now I look like I don't even know, like I'm glowing. We're gonna have fun with these, and we'll get more questions as well in the future, and we'll bring in more of the framework team as well. Actually, that's a really core part of this. Actually, before I close off, I will say we've got almost 60 people now in framework, almost 5 years in. So even though like my face, my glowing face right now is the face that's on the screen, obviously I'm only doing a very small part of the totality of what framework is. The reason we've been this successful and the reason we're going to continue to be this successful is that we've got an awesome team. We've got a killer team. And that's what gets me jazzed every day to wake up and keep going at this, not just building awesome products, being able to build them with such a cool group of people. And so I guess thanks to the whole marketing team, Haley and Destin team for actually putting this thing together and driving this to background. Also thanks to all the mods who jumped in to help moderate the comment stream. And yeah, in the future, as we do these live streams, I actually really, really want to introduce more of the framework team to all of you out there in the world, because these are amazing, capable, incredible people, and you should all get to know them. All right. Thanks, everybody.